Really, you need to understand that at 90, my dad went anywhere he wanted, anytime he wanted, would call us and say, I'll be in Wisconsin, and that's 340 miles, and he'd get in the car, pick up in. I mean, once in a while he had to do one of those roundy things more than once, he said, but he always found his way, and he stayed out of Madison. I said, Dad, I stay out of Madison, so that, I mean, if you don't, he would do anything he wanted. We were, one of the places he liked going was West Omaha. That's 90 miles from his house to the west side of Omaha. He had a favorite country western band that played there, Lloyd McCarter and the Honky Tonk Revival Band, just to give a plug. And one day he says to me, do you think the boys would come for my birthday? Party. They dressed in the local attire to blend in. That's the way he described it, and honestly, they feigned friendship, which was really hard on Dad. Um, at one point, when they came and said, "David, you might as well sign. We're going to get your land anyway." And at that point, he called every family member. I don't know why, we were all busy. He got a hold of his sister, ultimately, last one in the list, I don't know. And he said to her, I thought they were my friends. That was quite a statement, you know. It was really hard on him. And it just really took away a lot of who he was. Now, because my brothers and I live a distance away, two of us in Wisconsin, one in Nebraska, as I said, in Omaha, we were not aware of the changes, how drastic the changes were. We would talk with Dad often on the phone, but it just wasn't, I mean, once in a while it wasn't quite clicking, but okay, he repeated himself. In a short period of time from July to Thanksgiving, November, he lost 50 pounds. He got his days and nights mixed up. There were times he was talking about things he was seeing. I mean, it was just so upside down. And so, youngest brother and I would kind of take turns. We'd come and visit, stay night with him. I did not realize how bad it had gotten, and quickly called in some medical help, reassessing. All right, he's about 92 at that time. I mean, he just turned 93 in May 6th. Did the activity with the agents from Summit do all that to Dad? He was in his 90s. I mean, you can say, well, he's really had a good life, and we would agree. I just know it's very coincidental that now he's from his worldwide, anywhere I go, and his world is now 15 by 15 in skilled care nursing home in Denison. That's pretty drastic and significant. Insignificant. So that's where it got to. It had a contributing factor. I believe that.
Do you believe there is like an elder abuse?
What's it,
Do you
elder
believe
abuse?
there's like an elder abuse?
Not. Yeah, that's pretty harsh. They were never physical with Dad. They were. It was more of a ultimatum kind of thing. Um, I'm a pastor by calling now, and I work with elder abuse that is really, I mean, physical, and it's really bad. And the guys never got like that. Mm-hmm. But did their approach deteriorate his health? I think it did. Yeah, I think it happened.
Do you believe Summit should compensate him for that?
That's never been a question. I again, how could I prove, right? I'll just stick with, I know they were involved from this point to this point, and I know where he is now, and it didn't help. I know it did not help him one bit that way.
Thank you, sir.
Sure. Ms. Kaufman, we'll come back to you.
Hi, Mr. Boeck.
Yes.
I'm Julie Kaufman from Shelby County. I'm a landowner there with my husband. I just wanted to follow up about that question about elder abuse. May not have been physical abuse, but elder abuse as a nurse I know can be mental abuse also. And we've heard testimony about many people, many landowners have said they've lost sleep. It's been very emotionally difficult. Do you think that could be considered a type of, not necessarily elder, I mean, all of us maybe have suffered elder abuse. Do you believe that all landowners might be suffering some type of abuse from
in the general landowner abuse?
Correct.
That I think we've heard enough testimony toward that I would agree to, yes.
A more specific question I have is about, I also have some knowledge of the Loess Hills. I grew up in right in the Loess Hills also, and I'm very aware of how erodible the soil is because we lived on the top of a hill when I was young, and our county's kind of on the edge of it, but I know in your area it is very erodible soil, and this, if it does cut through your land and cause these problems, would this materially negatively impact your ground, and could you suffer pretty severe economic losses from this?
Well, with the loss of the soil, that's true. I mean, they aren't making more soil. If it gets covered over with cement, it's gone. If it washed down a river, it's gone. If it gets buried in a pipeline as it's tried to be restored, it's gone. Yes, that's an economic loss for us. And it was a very important part of Dad's farming mentality. Soon after we moved to the home place, the parcel of land that we're talking about isn't part of our home place. He moved up from Manila, Denison area when I was 2 years old. My two other brothers were born on that home place, to a 240, and he was very wise in his farming, grew that to some substantial acres by the time we're now at 93. But soon after he moved to the area, he was working with Iowa County and the ASC office, the Agricultural Services something, ASC, it's the ag business in Ida Grove, and developed, was part of the program to go visit other farmers in the area. It was a Soldier River watershed that they put together. They talked terraces, they talked crop cover and minimal tillage back when that was just, I mean, everyone was plowing all the time back in those early days, and said, it might be a better way to do this. Composting, leaving the stalks on the soil, leaving take the grain and leave everything else behind so it gives nutrition to the soil. They were talking that long time ago. I think most of the terraces that I drive around our area and see are, at least indirectly, there because Dad and his brother farmers had some conversation. His love for the soil said we need to take care of this, and he has worked on in various places on various farm pieces to put in structures to hold back the running water. And it was for a while, for a stretch of time, had land on both sides, on his side of the Soldier River in CRP, so that it would set back even a little more and have a crop cover to keep that water from getting in and eroding. The thing with loess soil, as it erodes, let me start again. If it is dry, it's stable and is very different from most other soils. But when water gets to these steep sides and starts taking it away, I don't know. Is this a time? Could we look at that addition, that additional information that I asked on from the Hungry Canyons Alliance? I think it would help in talking about.
I would object, Your Honor. We agreed to submit the exhibit, which, despite the fact we just seen it and it was not timely, I thought was an effort to be cooperative. But no one has actually asked the question about it, and this is turning the exhibit into supplemental direct testimony, which is not permitted.
So I'm asking the question. Sorry.
You're all right. You're all right. We'll just let Ms. Kaufman address that and Mr. Dublinski's objection.
Well, I can ask a different question, but I think he's already said that he is concerned about the soil, the land. I think, would you agree that you and most landowners here, or maybe all landowners here, are want to be good stewards of the land and are considered to be environmentalists? And let me finish. I was just going to say, do you believe that Summit wants to be good stewards of the land? Do you think that this use is being good stewards of the land?
If someone understands the nature of this soil and understands how getting a pipeline to enter in underneath this soil and turn it upside down, I don't think you can say they're environmentalists and concerned about the soil itself. On your lead-in part of that, are the landowners concerned, and are they good stewards? I believe that with all my heart. That it's our livelihood. It is life itself. We don't get up and go to work in the morning. We're at work already. It is you stay till it's done. We don't punch a clock. That's all part of who we are. It's our makeup. We do it together. It's not just us and against neighbors. It's the neighbor needs help, and we come together and help. Whether it's the livestock got out or it's the harvest, George got sick, and we all come together and help get it in. That's the life we have, and it's all based on the soil that we hold so very, very precious. So, there could be a very great discrepancy between those two entities that you mentioned, landowners and the Summit Carbon Solution Pipeline folks, I believe.
Well, excuse me, as a pastor, I think you'd probably agree with me that most of us who are faith-filled people would like to believe that God is our creator and that we are supposed to take good care of his creation. And that, I think, goes for politicians too. Do you think that goes for politicians too?
God loves all these people we talk about.
Exactly.
He really does. He really does. So we're not going to get him on one side or the other. He loves all of these people.
But we all have that. My question is, do you think we all have a responsibility to take good care of the soil and the earth and the environment?
That, yes. And whether you are part of the kingdom of the left hand, I'm a Lutheran Christian as well, which we talk about left hand and right hand kingdoms. Left hand is government and soldiers and police and that group. Community, society, right hand is church. And both kingdoms are very involved with stewardship of God's gifts to us. The left-hand part takes care of making sure legally we are taking care of things so that and holding people accountable. The right hand says use these gifts to benefit all people. The land provides us with enough for ourselves and more than enough to share with others. It is an amazing gift that God has given to us. And to be part of that is, in both ways, has been a great blessing. Been a great blessing.
But specifically, do you believe that our politicians are fulfilling their responsibility in protecting our right? I mean, we have God-given rights too, and do we need to be speaking out as we have been doing and continue to speak out for our God-given rights? If indeed we do have God-given rights, or unalienable rights, if you prefer.
We have God-given rights. I would never ever blanket all politicians in the same camp.
Correct.
Because I have in my dad's home congregation, one of the senators comes to Bible study with me every time I visit. He sits there with me. I know where his heart is. So it's not a blanket kind of statement. I think we should remind ourselves we'll all be held accountable one day to an authority much bigger than IUB or state legislator of Iowa and all that. That's coming, but in the meantime, we should be accountable to one another that we make the best use of these gifts that God has given us, and in a way that benefits with blessing more than just a for-profit corporation and investors. I think somehow that gets really cloudy and quickly when we talk that part of this. So.
Since this private investment company, Summit, is a private investment company, but yet it gets public funding through the tax credits, do you believe that the investor list should be open to the public so we know who is invested in this? And
In my pre-file testimony, I did mention that I would really love to see much more transparency, not only the brief titled big corporation kind of titles to who they are, but getting down to more specifics. I'm led to believe from my reading we have foreign investors involved also with Summit. That's my take on what I look into. South Korea, some other, even China. Some names that come up that are not friends of the United States in other situations. I'm a little concerned about having our land connected with folks who may not be ultimately our friends in other situations besides wanting to get the tax credit money or equivalent.
Another question I have is with regard to CO2 in the atmosphere. I mean, some would like to portray it as science, that it's causing climate chaos, and and it's not necessarily, according to what I've read, and do you agree with this, that it is not settled science about whether or not CO2 in the atmosphere is bad for the environment? Do you understand that it's definitely this is settled science, that CO2 in the atmosphere is definitely causing climate chaos?
Objection, Your Honor.
State the objection.
I don't know that it's within any decision criteria in front of this board to make a decision on the broader policy of whether climate science is settled or not, nor do I think there's any foundation for the assumptions in the question or necessarily for this witness, however well-spoken he may be. The issue of whether or not to decide that climate science is settled or not just is not an issue before this board.
Well, may I respond?
Yep.
I would like to say that I think climate change, the discussion at that we're having in this country about climate change is valid, and that we should consider different viewpoints. And this is from a Nobel Prize winner that said climate change.
Objection, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Clearly,
This is
Ms.
about-
Kaufman has just
Ms. Kaufman,
Ms. Kaufman has had an opportunity to testify in this case. She's attempting to just add additional testimony through her questions, through her statements that shouldn't be allowed. At the end of the day, the issue of climate policy, climate science is beyond the scope of this board and beyond the scope of this board's authority.
CO2, the whole thing driving this is about the CO2 thing, correct?
so
And
Ms. Kaufman, and I apologize if
I
I'm
think this
being
is relevant.
pedantic. What Mr. Dubinsky is saying is your cross-examination needs to be questions about Mr. Boeck's previous testimony that has already been filed, and that it is now not the time to introduce your argument. So
Well,
you can reply to Mr. Dubinsky's statement,
Okay,
or you can ask a question of Mr. Boeck.
well, to Mr.
Boeck.
Dubinsky's statement, I would say our public policy is very much connected to climate change, and I think this is very relevant. But I will ask a different question if you insist. But I think it's
We're trying, Ms. Kaufman.
okay. Do you think that our public policy and our environment, this is being pushed by climate change policy?
Objection.
State your objection.
Again, I mean, absolutely no disrespect to the witness, but this particular witness's opinion on climate change policy writ large is not relevant to any decision criteria in front of the board.
Ms. Kaufman, do you have a response?
Well, I disagree, but I guess I can. Are you overruling my question?
Okay, so Ms. Kaufman, Mr. Boeck's pre-filed testimony does address climate change, so you may ask a question about climate change as it relates to his pre-filed testimony, but we're trying to avoid the broad blanket repetition. Everything, just so we're clear, everything in the record is going to be reviewed and be reviewed and re-reviewed. So the whole point of all of our rules is that we are not unduly repetitious. So please feel free to ask your question, but we're going to, in cross-examination, we're trying to relate this back to the pre-filed testimony. And I'm pointing at it because it's pulled up here, sorry.
Okay, in regard to climate change then, if CO2 is a danger to your land and our land or whoever's land we're talking about, do you believe that putting it in the ground and wasting it, as these pipelines want to do or say they want to do, although it has been brought up that it might be used for fracking or whatever, but do you think this is the best use of carbon dioxide, or are there do you think that other scientists may disagree with that, this premise that this is the best use of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere for your land?
No. Just a straightforward point to your question, not the best use. I also don't think it's the best approach to getting rid of carbon dioxide if that's what's necessary. I find it interesting that the state of Iowa does not have a policy on is there climate change or not. They've not made a policy about it. So to demonize it and call it evil, as some would, seems to miss the point. And yet to release vast quantities of it in the air, well, I'm stuck. I see value to more carbon dioxide because plants use it, and it seems like our crops would thrive. We're in a dearth, from another expert that I read. I can't point to in my things. I've been continued reading, and where I picked that up, I don't know, but we're in a dearth of carbon dioxide since somewhere on the Reformation and beyond. My references are rather obvious where I keep my history in line. So that's about the best I can do with that question.
So you agree then that it's okay to have continued questioning about climate change and whether or not CO2 in the atmosphere is really a terrible thing or not?
Absolutely necessary, absolutely. And if history repeats itself, also opinions about the objects or the subjects we're talking can move drastically quickly. We've found all kinds of things in our society that at one time were very obvious to people and now is extremely questioned. And I'm not even going to bring up the names of those things because that's really not part of what we're doing here. For carbon dioxide, it used to be understood as just one of those wonderful elements that we have that God has given us. But now it's this demonized toxic poison that someone would like to get rid of. And I'm going, we can't live without this. So, yes, discussion needs to continue. It absolutely needs to keep moving forward.
Thank you. That answers my
Okay.
question. Thank you very much. It's hard to get there.
Ms. Coles? Clearing the map.
Good afternoon, Mr. Boyce. Ms. Kaufman and Ms. Hike answered a lot of my questions that I was going to ask, but one thing I did not get, how long has your father or your family owned this land?
We moved to, I say we because I was 2. We moved 1954. That I was born in 52, so that math works. And so he has been nearly, 70 years now, 70 years farming in the area. The farm has grown, obviously, from this particular piece of property that we're talking about. Came to us soon after my mom died in 2001, I believe it was, when we call it the Peterson farm. Dad refers to by who owned it last. That's been the way we know where I'm supposed to take the feeder wagon and stuff. That I knew which farm to go to by that last name.
Okay, could you please put the KMZ map up, please? You indicated that you have a lot of lost soils and that these terraces are hills, correct?
That because there are 2 terraces on this topographic equivalent map. I mean, that a terrace top, the ridge, will follow that same height above sea level around the hill. So that then has become the basis of contour farming. That will be a straight line for a row crop around the terrace as you plant. Because there are 2 terraces in this area, it tells you, since they're the same distance apart always on that piece of property, this is a higher hill. And unfortunately, the pipeline is cutting through basically the highest point of the farm, Peterson Farm in this area, and in disrupting the most, I believe, when it comes to risking erosion. It's a fact that terraces will break through every now and again, and then you have to get the bulldozer in to fix them. I'm very concerned that as we try to fix a break here, and if future generations don't know how deep that pipeline is, or can we even fix it, there's a lot of questions that have remain unanswered for me as far as what we can do on that land and who's accountable and who needs to be responsible financially to put it back together. We didn't dig the new trench for water to flow. Someone else did. And yet I don't have real strong answers from anyone on how that will be handled.
Are you familiar with how they surveyed your land?
I believe they did survey it. I think I got a letter, never objected to that, and so I'm sure they did, but I do not know when they went. I don't know anything about it. Like I said, I live in Wisconsin. I was away from it. My dad was not aware either. Since we hired Brian Jorde and company, they have kept a distance from us.
Okay, are you aware that that was probably a topical survey, above ground survey, not where they drill holes?
And I'm not aware. It would be my guess, but that's only a guess.
Are you aware that Summit did the pipeline routing by desktop instead of by geohazard surveying?
I was not aware. As I've watched and listened remotely also to some of the concerns landowners have voiced, it would be apparent that was the approach, that they weren't able from desktop or laptop to see and inquire and visually comprehend all the concerns that many of the landowners are bringing up.
Do you have concern that constructing this pipeline and going through those terraces, it could introduce water to the area around the pipeline, which would cause movement?
Absolutely. And the structures that will be put in close to the Soldier River on both sides of the river will be forever and always a location for erosion, and whatever structure is put there, put in place to hold those pipes in place, will be threatened, which then leads to the threat of breakage, and we've had that discussion over and over and over.
So the introduction of moisture there or erosion could, I think you mentioned, could create a channel for the water to flow through that area.
Yes, ma'am. That's the one of the characteristics of loess soil. It's great when it's dry, but when it gets wet, it collapses and drops away. Right here at that spot on either side of this pipeline, the Soldier River has an extremely straight vertical riverbank. I did not get to view that myself. I had no opportunity from when I heard we were starting early with the hearings because the crops were in, but our renter shared with me, yeah, Alan, he said that spot is really pretty steep right there. So if water gets down this direction and starts taking away the riverbank, even though they've set back the structures for going down drilling underneath, there's a threat to the pipeline itself that will really require constant maintenance. Maintained. Somebody has to keep an eye on it.
So from the terracing to the river, it goes downhill. So the flow, if there was a leak because of movement in the soldering, either detect it, it would be very challenging to detect it. Instead of a rupture, that there could be leakage from that pipeline undetected that would flow into the Soldier River.
I'm certain the pipeline when constructed is sealed and will contain CO2. Would the water around it cause the leakage? I don't think so. It would be rather the leverage put on the pipe that would cause it under its own weight, or the support to be eroded. And now the gravity and pulling it apart can cause breakage, especially if over the generations, what's going on inside the pipeline. It's very hard to get all water out of CO2. There will always be some moisture in it. And anytime you have carbon dioxide with water, you get carbonic acid, and that eats steel pipes. It may not be quickly, but this is a forever easement that's being talked about. Somewhere along the way, this is going to be a problem. And not only here, but every place the pipeline is crossing a river, which is unimaginable. You will not believe how many rivers there are in western Iowa that the pipeline is crossing. I'm hoping they're thinking about a line item maintenance in the budget, because it's going to require a great deal of taking care of over the generations.
So you have concern with the gas CO2 connecting with the water into the river, which results in carbonic acid. The two mixing together results in a toxic carbonic acid if they come into contact with each other. If there's a leak, it will happen, and there's moisture in the ground.
Objection, Your Honor. State the objection.
I don't see where this is responsive to anything in the pre-filed testimony.
Ms. Colas.
I'll answer another question.
Okay, thank you.
You've mentioned that this pipeline going through this property would need constant or continuous maintenance to operate safely. Is that correct?
I believe that's absolutely right. It's going to need a lot of care that way through maintenance.
Are you aware that the easement or the eminent domain indicates that you cannot do any structure or repairs or contouring changes or anything around the pipeline?
I read that in the easement. That's why I said a moment ago, Summit Carbon is going to have to be responsible for what they're putting in the ground, because someone has to take care of that. Because things are going to happen to it. And if we are forbidden as landowners, then they better be, or there's a great deal of havoc that's going to be raised.
Do you have, with your contact with Summit and your knowledge of how they operate, do you have any confidence in, because they have not installed a pipeline prior to this time, they have no experience, that they will be able to construct this pipeline safely?
I'm not confident, not only because I've read from the CEO himself, I've not built a pipeline like the CO2 pipeline, but there's never been a pipeline this large, a project this large undertaken. This is like the first of its kind, as I'm aware. There's a lot of things about this that nobody knows how it's going to really work out. When you put safety valves 20 miles apart, to me that already is saying, that adds a great question to me about how much they know about pipeline building. I've also in one of my attachments, there's a reference to a history of carbon dioxide pipelines having a record of 2 times the incidence as natural gas pipelines. That's a great concern to me. For multiple reasons of how vastly different those two things are. A lot of folks here will take the risk with a natural gas pipeline because it's not nearly the pressure. It's something we all can use and benefit from. It's a great blessing. It helps us out in the rural country to take care of whatever we need to do with energy and power. Carbon dioxide doesn't offer me anything really, or the landowners. So.
Do you think that Summit Carbon has the ability or the knowledge to operate and maintain the pipeline safely?
I would not know that. I'm not sure of who they all have on staff. I'm not certain they have that kind of interest, but do they have the capability? I wouldn't be able to comment on that one.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay.
Ms. Grunhagen.
Thank you. Hi, Mr. Boeck. I have a quick question. Looking here up at the KMZ file with the two terraces, do you have tile associated with those terraces?
I've asked our renter if he knows. This particular farm piece came into under my dad's name and ours after I moved away. So I was already a pastor in Wisconsin a couple of decades by that time. And I have suspicion in this area because it's part of the lowest area, but I could not say if there's any drain tile anywhere in the stretch of Peterson, of the particular farm that my dad owns.
And then have you reviewed the Exhibit H that was mailed to you back in July?
I did.
Okay. And it does not list a farm tenant, but you do in fact have a farm tenant on this.
Chris Knutson has been Dad's tenant for some 25 years, I think. It's been one of the great examples of landowners and tenants and how to work together. They do agreement on things, the old handshake and a nod, let's go out for breakfast kind of way that I just deeply admire. So,
Great. Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Mr. Dublinsky.
Thank you, Your Honor. Mr. Boeck, I just have one issue I want to follow up on. It's a discussion you've had with both Mr. Taylor and Ms. Colas. I believe with Mr. Taylor, you were talking about land restoration and tile restoration, and you said that you've heard promises, but you hadn't seen it in writing. And then you said, well, I've seen language in the easement, but not anywhere else. And then I believe slightly differently with Ms. Colas talking about a similar subject, you said that you hadn't seen any details on how that would be done. Is that a fair summary of your...
fair summary, yes.
Are you familiar with Chapter 9 of the Utilities Board's rules?
I've looked through the rules, but I can't identify Chapter 9.
And then have you looked at what's called an agricultural impact mitigation plan that Summit filed with the board pursuant to those rules?
And I am not.
Okay. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Mr. Jorde, redirect.
Along those lines, regardless of what a rule says or what someone promises now, that doesn't always end up equaling to actually following through or in a way that's acceptable to landowners. Would you agree with that?
I would agree.
All right. And would you also agree that how someone has shown us they act and behave is the best indication of how they'll likely behave in the future?
Yes. My own occupation would say that.
And you had mentioned that the state of Iowa doesn't have a policy or a recognizable policy on climate change. Do you think the fact that this state doesn't even recognize that climate change is real, doesn't have an official policy on what to do to address climate change if it is real, don't you agree that significantly undercuts and actually is devastating to Summit's pitch that this project is publicly necessary to address climate change?
I would agree that if I'm understanding the direction that went, that you better restate it, because I want to make sure I'm answering as you've worded it.
Well, so to break it down, this is a board, this is state creation, that IUB, that just doesn't, exist naturally. And
Exactly.
so if the state creates the IUB to look over this whole process, and if Summit is telling you, the landowner, you should give them an easement and agree to this because, gosh darn it, we're going to, contribute to the reduction of CO2. But therefore, if the state at the very top of all of this doesn't even recognize that as a real thing and has no state policy to address it, wouldn't you agree Summit's pitch is completely irrelevant and shouldn't even be considered?
Yes, I would. And I thought that's the way you were going, but I wanted to make sure.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Sure.
All right, thank you, Mr. Boeck. You are dismissed. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Jorde, the next witness.
Yes, I'm going to virtual, I hope, Brenda Jarrow